Ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right. Well, welcome to the Gyaff, Nazima Raghubir. So nice to have you. How are you doing?
I am great. Thank you for having me here.
No problem. I always enjoy talking to, members of the press and journalists. I think, it's very interesting perspective. It's so relevant in our society, how we get our information, this day and age, especially with social media and, everyone having an opinion and giving their information. It's important to at least discuss where information is coming from. I guess I just want to ask you, do you notice it getting significantly more difficult to practice journalism with the challenges of so many facets of information coming from everywhere?
I think there are challenges throughout, journalism. From the time I entered about 20 something years ago to now, we're programmed to roll with the punches. You inform yourself, you adapt, you try to ensure that you can fit yourself into whatever's going on and move on. There are so many purveyors of communication right now. There are so many things happening. For me, I don't think it's new. Back in my day, there were more talk show hosts on TV. They were doing irresponsible things. We have changed a bit of that with legislative regulations and so on. Journalism, obviously, and journalists have ethics and principles to be guided by. Not everybody have or operate by the same rules. So I don't think a lot has changed in that regard. There is definitely different, how to put it, there are probably sort of different types of or new types of challenges that have emerged over time, but they're all keeping within the same, they have the same purpose to communicate messages and so on. It's just that people do it differently. Of course, journalists can't say certain things without your three sources, corroboration, and your fact checking and stuff like that. So the challenge is, and what we've seen, and I've actually just come back from the Caribbean Media Summit in Jamaica, where we were discussing AI, media, and journalism, and the challenges that AI now brings to journalism and what we do. And I've said this before, like there are things that are happening there, but I know of many cases where people listen to, what is out there, what is on the internet, what is on social media, and then they come back to the news to see whether or not this makes sense or to fact check the information that they've heard before. Of course, there are things like information is much more in your face now. It's much more there. It's accessible. Of course, everybody has a smartphone, and people are eager to share. So, one of the things I've been saying, because I'm part of a misinformation and disinformation literacy program, you have to fight the urge to share. You have to build a reputation for yourself, right? Why are you sending people wrong information and then come back to you and, say, but you're sharing this? Why? We've seen a lot of this during the period with the pandemic. There was so many questions, which I felt was healthy. There were healthy discussions to be had on the pandemic itself, people asking questions on vaccination and so on. But there were, at the same time, was also so much information out there for you to digest. That went two ways. People shut down or shut out the information because it was too technical, scientific, and it was too much to deal with. And then people just said, okay, I'm going to share everything that come to me. So that's my long answer to your
No, for sure. The pandemic to me definitely catalyzed this sort of mistrust of information, and then, like you said, the oversharing or it really, to me, I think it exposed where are we getting our information from, and who's and how is that information being crafted, and for what reason, maybe Guyana a little bit more because, we had the pandemic and we had our whole
elections
debacle with, it was just a mess. I mean, we didn't really know anything. And then there were obviously a lot of restrictions preventing us for our safety or
I
whatever.
don't like to blame the pandemic as much. I think the pandemic came at a time to test, how we deal with information. But there was a man called Trump who had access to social media. Prior to Trump, there was Obama who embraced social media in a way to campaign without actually involving the news outlets to campaign. And I think that was a major turn in how people access information and what they see. Because prior to social media, there were the interviews that politicians would have to do with people like myself, which would have that accountability mechanism built into. But now they had access to do something where nobody's questioning them. They can just pick up their phone, they can just create something to just speak to their voters. And so there was Obama embracing it, and then there was Trump, and Trump had several aims, and one of them was to really discredit anything that really questioned him, including his opponents and what he considered these news outlets that were against him. And so you already had that. And then obviously, the pandemic came into being.
Yeah. Well, Trump, that was one of the first presidents to really, in this modern day, to frontally antagonize the media. And like you said, I guess he sort of wanted to control his own narrative, as I guess, most people who were desperately vying for power will do. It was very interesting to see. Do you think that, his sort of actions had a response globally on how people view the media? I mean, Trump's influence is, it goes beyond the United States. Do you think that, that sort of, turned other people against the media who maybe have similar values or are a fan of Trump or things like that?
I feel like things like this have been going on for ages. There are Caribbean politicians who had the same playbook that Trump, used. They were not emboldened or empowered to use it in the way that he did until he did. But there are other people around the world. Vladimir Putin had been using a similar playbook. It's just that we in the Caribbean don't focus much on what is happening in Russia and what is happening in Europe. So, I think all these politicians, maybe they have this secret playbook on how to deal with, information and interviews in the media. And I know the media and politicians have had, a very interesting relationship over the decades. I don't think it's going to change, but definitely what I've seen over the years is that they continue to use the mediums that are now available to them, and who knows what is going to be available in 10 years, to put their messages and their narratives over. It has made our work a lot harder, and I think that could be a good thing. I think, there are a lot of things that we still need to do as journalists, outside of your fact checking and trying to corroborate and stuff like that. It is a time for us to do more investigative work, more collaborations, try to understand a lot more of the issues that we're covering. And even as I say that, that comes with a lot of pressure, because newsrooms in the Caribbean and the world, they're getting smaller, they're shrinker. I'd be the first to tell you that, journalism doesn't pay. I was speaking to some students at Carimac, and I said, as much as I'm going to tell you this, journalism does not pay. And yes, I've been in it for the love of it. I know people who are in it for the love of it. And while it doesn't pay, it has really been a teacher in my life. I've been exposed to so much. I have learned so much. And I think that is a valuable lesson that you can, take away.
Yeah. Well, the presence of journalism in the marketplace, I guess when you, especially with like established media houses or new media houses, you have to sort of make money, right? Somehow to keep the ship going, the ship afloat. And a lot of that obviously comes with ads and sponsorship, especially when you're on digital platforms. And I guess as a result, the agenda or narrative by a certain media house is also could be open to influence as well, for like private interests and stuff like that. going back to the Trump thing, I think as much as Trump sort of had this big created the Western viewpoint shift on media houses themselves sort of imploded because they obviously push certain agendas. At least to me as a viewer, like
Yeah.
if I look at Fox News, I see one thing, and then if I look at CNN, I see a totally different thing, and they're desperately trying to play into that sort of right wing, left wing political viewpoint. You know, I kind of, I mean, and then I look at us here, and to me, it's a bit different. We're more like, in Guyana, it's a bit more like, there are definitely sides to different feelings of media, but it's interesting how when we look at how our media has to maybe sidestep around the government at the time, whoever, do you find it particularly difficult to navigate our political landscape and utilize media?
I'm going to say this, and this is something that, I've said publicly before. The media is divided just as the country. We come from the society that is already divided. We come from a society where politics and sometimes ethnicity dictate, what happens and how certain things are viewed. And that is the reality. That is the natural reality. It can be a bit difficult to navigate all of this. And, the 2020 elections was a perfect example. Myself and other journalists were bullied, either online or in person, by all factions involved. And, these are stories like I've not spoken about publicly for a very long time. I remember I had a meeting with editors and I'd mentioned some of it. And I know journalists, we internalize a lot of what, happened to us, and then we move on because it's about getting the job done
Yeah.
and that type of thing. So we have to navigate a lot of things. You have to navigate being called anti this and pro this and pro that just because you're asking probing questions. I've been taught not to take a lot of it personally, and I've taught to deal with it professionally and ensure that my story covers, what it is that I'm looking for wholesomely. And I've always used that. I'm very thankful for the two people that guided me early in journalism, and it's probably because I was so young. I was taught to look at certain things, spend time reading and researching, and ensure that you have all your information and stuff like that. And journalism can be very difficult. People don't like to answer hard questions. People don't like to look back to their constituency and stuff like that. But this is what I feel. I feel transparency and accountability can be useful to you and your governance style. Being open to the media, doing interviews, having proper access to information laws, being open with your decisions that you're making, your expenses, your expenditure, that type of thing. I think those things are, very important. And I know I'm going to get a lot of flack for even, saying that because I saw 2 days ago the former president of the Guyana Press Association making statements about, the Guyana Press Association, and we're not transparent and accountable and stuff like that. And Alex, I'll say this. The Guyana Press Association has nothing to hide. It has always been a transparent body. We've had membership meetings. We put out, yes, we don't have audited accounts because, the association has been around since 1945. And like every other organization in this country, you really got to bend backward to find any record of any organization. Record keeping is not a thing that, we embrace. And all of that is I'm trying to fix all of that now. The executive is trying to fix all of that now. But, people, you're talking about navigating certain things. People want to use these examples to say, oh, the press shouldn't question me because they themselves are not accountable.
It's a whataboutism.
Yes, so, when I see these things, I'm also like, really, do you really want to go down that road?
Yeah.
You know, so when I see those things, I think to myself, you're playing this card and you really don't want to own up to whatever it is that you have to do or your constitutional responsibility is all about.
Sure. Totally hear you. Now that you brought it up, and I was going to ask you about it. It's funny, actually, because a few days, maybe 2 days before I asked you to come on and chat, I know this has been a while coming. We've been talking about it, but when we confirmed our date, I read Starbucks News every morning. I start my day with my cup of coffee in Starbucks, and I was going through reading the editorials and the letters, and I saw the letter.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting because this is sort of an issue that started a while ago, from maybe before the last press
Well, the last
association election.
elections,
Yeah, right. So if you don't mind, could we, I just want to walk through a few things. So this sort of began. You were first elected in 2018. You did a full term. 2020 COVID hit. You guys didn't want to do the elections in January because they called for elections with the no confidence motion, and you're like, okay, let's get the elections done. We'll have the voting after. COVID happened. It sort of put the elections on the back burner for until 2020.
23. Yeah.
You said that, and again, these are all, please correct me if I'm wrong. This is all the records I've read in Starbuck. You said, or the association decided that, it doesn't make sense to do an election online.
No,
It's
our
not
constitution
transparent.
doesn't allow for
Right, and that could be
so
questioned,
many-
and that could be questioned
Yes.
if whatever the results
Yeah.
had. So you didn't do it until 2023. But wasn't there room to do it prior to 2023 when it opened
there
up?
was room, but let me just put a lot of this into perspective.
Sure, please.
Nobody was running from any elections.
Gotcha.
Our executive members are all working members of the media. And that's a reality that we face. That is the reality of associations all around the region, all around the world. Very few associations have funds where they can actually employ people that work outside of the media to ensure that these things happen. And that's just a reality.
So everybody on Press Association is part-time, more or less.
No. Everybody working are full-time journalists. We are volunteers. We are elected, and we do this voluntarily.
Gotcha.
As executive members. In fact, every day of my life, half of my day is spent just looking after. You heard me before I get here making an appointment for a meeting. That is related to the Press Association. From here, I'm going to leave to go to that meeting and spend probably another hour at that meeting to get a few things sorted out. But let me get back to the 2018 and the elections. So I've been serving in the Guyana Press Association since 2002 when I entered journalism. I know most of the inner workings of the association, and I know what transpired before and what we have been working with over the years. We don't have like an office. That has been something that we've been talking about for such a long time. When I had seen what our accounts were in 2002, there weren't any accounts that were made up or anything. They were just simply receipt books from the then treasurer, Andrea Tika Singh, who used to be at Capital News. So we have, over the years, tried to sort all of this out to ensure that we have some sort of record of our membership, record of the association, trying to put a lot of things into perspective. Now, you could imagine people working full-time jobs during the day, trying to put all of this aside and putting this together, is not easy. And if I look back at Mr. Neil Marx's presidency, he has not gotten none of these things off the ground that he set out to do when he, became president. There were
And he was there before you
Yeah, he
were.
was just before me. There were no audited accounts from him. I had prepared statements, financial statements, which I had presented to the council, but these were not audited because the step to find an auditor and all of that had never happened. And there are so many other things. Our constitution there have been calls for reform for ages now. So this step that we're taking is not a new step. It has to be taken. We can't hold virtual meetings. So in 2018, in coming down to 2020, I had actually given the executive an edict and said, we need to hold these elections. It has been, going on too long. This is not the first time that we have been way beyond the 2-year term to hold elections. It had happened prior to Mr. Neil Marks, and it had happened prior to the person who was there before. The elections was one thing, the general elections, and of course the pandemic. And I had looked at what was going on around the world. One of the international affiliates that we're working with, they could not hold any elections because their constitution did not allow for it. They could have held one meeting of their council and it could be a no voting meeting. But the pandemic caught everybody, a little off because nobody envisaged that this was something that they would have had to make changes to. So when that happened, I said, we need to call the elections and get this out of the way. When the elections happened, there were so many things that were happening at the same time.
You're talking about the elections last year.
I'm talking about our elections.
Just a quick question. Between 2020 and 2023, was anybody pushing to have the elections? Was anybody saying, Nazima, do we need to call elections?
No, not externally. Not externally. There were discussions that we had as an executive inside, but none of our membership was coming to us and say, we need to have elections. What is happening with elections? None of that was happening. In fact, we had a number of training sessions that were virtual between 2020 and 2023 because we could not do any in-person training. People were still telling us when we were planning training activities, are you doing in person? I had COVID about 3 times. I don't want to come. And then we had lost some colleagues. We lost Namila Mondale. We lost Imran Khan, who was not a member of the media, but he had interacted with media people. So there were people who were telling us that, and there were people of a certain age group who had already said to us, I don't want to come out. I don't want to do this. I don't want to interact with people. So we were already, dealing with that. In fact, I made a statement on the anniversary. I made a comment on the anniversary of our elections the other day, which was like Monday. And I remembered a few things. I mean, a lot of this I haven't really spoken about, right? And it was so funny because the year before we called the elections, the person who had challenged me had actually called me on the phone and asked me, are you running again? And I said, no, I was not running again because I'm tired. And
this is what year?
This was in 2022.
Okay.
He never asked when we were holding elections or what. He asked if I was running again. And I said, I don't think so. No, I'm tired. Like, I just want to, do some things for myself. And he said, well, we need a strong person there because when the bleep start with the stupidness, we need a strong person there. And I was like, okay. And I mean, that didn't influence me in running in any way. But, when the challenges to the elections, and the challenges, interestingly, to the elections happened 2 weeks before the elections date. We had actually announced our elections in keeping with our constitution. More than a month, we put out the public notice and all of that. And 2 weeks before the elections date, somebody just wake up and said, but you're not registering members, and you're not this, and you're not that. And it was very strange to me. This was somebody who had only run, he didn't even run for 1 elections, have never been to GPA elections prior to that one event that he had come to. we have never been on the record of producing a public list of our members. We have no voters list. It's a list of our members. And in fact, every time elections come around, there are people from certain sections of the media would call and say, please ensure that my name is not anywhere publicly because I'm going to be chastised at work. And we were already dealing with that.
Sorry, just to pause you quickly. When you produce a voters list, is that just a list of voters, or does it have to? It says who voted for who.
It's a members list. We have a membership list. So we don't
Okay,
have a
sorry.
voters list. No, we just call out our members who are financially viable to vote at the elections.
Based
we
on the
just
dues
call
they
out,
pay.
yeah, based on their dues, and that is usually done at our forum.
And people don't want their name to be published on that list because
People say
they'll
to
be
us,
pressured
no,
to go a certain way.
People don't want it to be written and made public because they'd be pressured.
Right.
In fact, at the last election, several persons called us and said, if it is known that I'm a member of the association, I would be told to vote this way because there is... I'm acting in this position and I'm waiting to be promoted to this other position, and it's going to mess with whatever is going on. And, that was a reality we had to deal with. In fact, over the years, and this is not about speaking about the elections last year, we've had members who wanted their CSME certificate, and the Guyana Press Association actually would give a letter to Foreign Affairs to say that this person is a member of the press for how many years and whatever. People have come to us and say, I'd like to pay my membership dues, I'd like to join the association, but could you not let my boss know? And it's usually from the state entities that I am a member of the Guyana Press Association, because they've been dissuaded to join the association and they've been told you can't join the association. So we were already dealing with issues like that. I don't know. I mean, I think I know the reason, things were said and went the way that they went, but we had nothing to hide. Everybody from the association was there on the elections day. They should have been challenged on the floor. They should have been told, the people, I see a lot of comments being made about who is a farmer and who is a taxi driver. These people were there. These people had reached out to me, and I said to them, if you are so offended, the courts are there to go, because I see these people on assignments. I see these people going to work and being on assignments. You see a photograph of a man chopping some grass and weeding in his yard, and you just decide that you can call him a farmer for seeing that. And, he is a member of the media who worked with you. I think that for me is probably one of the saddest things I've seen and one of the most upsetting things I've seen.
So just to rewind back a little bit, 2 weeks before the elections, which is when it was called, this is when conflict started to happen. Now, I'm assuming at this time there was an attempt, not necessarily by, I'm just going to use Neil because he's your opposition or person challenging for the spot at the time. But I'm assuming there were people of who wanted to also register as members to be able to vote. There was a flood of those people?
That is so interesting. 2 weeks before, there were people who came from, I think, I was not involved in this process, but one of the meetings that we called, we were told that there were people from NCN who had come forward to register, but none of them were active members of the media, as in our constitution talks about your income coming from, 90% of your income has to come from journalism and all of that. And I think if my memory serves me correct, the people were told that you can register for the association, but you would not be voting members even though you register. So I think that was the issue.
Because there are tiers of membership.
There are tiers of membership. Full membership, full membership. So if there is a journalist out of that lot who had registered. That person would have obviously been eligible to vote. But these people were not journalists, they were not full time media workers. And I think that was the issue. That issue was then taken and, escalated to another level and stuff like that. None of these people, and it was so interesting to me because there were people from that lot who actually, after hearing their names were on this list sent to us, said, I didn't sign up for my name to be on this list because, I'm a driver and I'm a this and I'm a that. And, I was very confused. There was a membership committee dealing with this particular thing at the time, and they had responded to it and stuff like that. And all of that, it was really, I don't know, I was taken back by this attempt to really hijack the association. Alex, let me say this. Prior to us calling the elections, I had no intentions of running for president again. I felt I've given my all to the association, done what I could have done within the couple of years. And a few people had called and said, I see y'all calling elections. Are you going to be running? And I said, no. And people came to my office. About 5 or 6 of my colleagues came to my office and said, can you just consider giving us 2 more years of your life? And we have to get a few things done. And I said, I'm going to think about it. I'm going to talk to my partner. And, if it's something that we can do, I certainly have no problem. And I'd spoken to him, and he was like, I'm going to tell you one thing, and you're going to do your own thing anyhow. And so when I got involved, and I said I'm going to run and stuff like that, when people called me to tell me, what was going on in the background of whatever, I was like, this attempt is real. And from how I know it, for the years that I've been involved in the association remains one of the bodies that the politicians can't manipulate. And I think that can be upsetting on so many levels. In the coalition years, when the Press Association called out Mr. Granger for not holding press conferences, there were people angry with us and trying to call my phone and saying, but why would you do this and stuff like that. I hung up the phone on people like that. And people trying to tell us, the Press Association shouldn't call the president out. Obviously very partisan views. So, the years that I've been involved, there's nobody who can, manipulate the association into this politics or that politics of the day. And I think what I've been seeing over the months with civic space, it's very scary. The types of things that have happened to the Guyana Human Rights Association, the Guyana Teachers Union, advocacy bodies, personalities questioning certain things. It's like any adversarial or what you consider adversarial voice is being challenged. And now, the press, it is very concerning.
I just want to touch on a few more things with regards to the election and the sort of controversy, not controversy, the conflict. So, to be able to be considered a member of the GPA, you have to have 90%, at least 90% of your income coming from journalism. Now, GPA is as you said, a voluntary organization. You guys sort of call elections. The last time elections were called, it's a relatively short period of time, 2 weeks. Now,
it was a month. Our notice was a month.
Okay. Yeah. The notice was a month. Sorry, I thought you said 2 weeks earlier. Now, obviously, this is an opportunity for, elections are coming up. And this is just conspiracy here, not to spread conspiracy, but, you may have a flux of people who maybe can have an influence on the direction of where the GPA goes in the future. you don't allow members with less than 90% of income, which can't really be proven unless I'm showing you all of my
Yeah.
pay slips. You said yourself that journalism doesn't pay the bills. So even if I'm a full-time journalist, but I'm making most of my income, I'm making this up by trading online or selling something. There's no way for you to prove that. So that also doesn't necessarily give the press association. There are no clear, limitations of what who can be accepted. How do you sort of bridge that gap? Like it's to me, and this is just my independent criticism, right? It leaves the press association the ability to sort of decide, okay, well, we don't consider you suitable for a full-time thing. So I'm just trying to understand, like, if there's no clear rules.
There are clear rules. The 90% of your income is not the only stipulation. You have to be 3 working continuous years in the
Okay.
media. And I think there is the term news gathering, directly involved in news gathering, with 90% of your income coming from journalism. And I wanted to address that. I'm happy that you brought it up.
Yeah.
We have had instances where people actually come to our meetings and say to us in prior elections, because what happens is that in the room, Alex Arjun, Nazima Raghubir, Ivor Wharton, Svetlana Marshall, Neil Marks, whoever names are called out, and people have said, I object to that name because that person is not a member of the media. And we've said to that person, could you say which media house you work with, and could you prove that you've been working at that media house? And that has happened in the past because the media in Guyana is a very small environment. Everybody knows everybody.
Sure.
If you left a media house today, somebody knows that you've gone over there. Part of our press pass process, when you sign up for a press pass as a working member of the media, you actually have to provide a letter from your editor substantiating that you work at this entity. So that is another, tier of double checking that this person. We just received a letter from Newsroom about someone of their correspondents in Essequibo. We just issued a number of press passes, and more than 50% of those persons had to provide letters from their editors, from their media houses, sign that they are working with the media houses. Stabrick News had a number of new staff within the past couple of years, and they sent us a cover letter with all the names to substantiate that these people, are working within the media houses. There was another thing I was going to mention here. That month that we called elections, nobody was deregistered or nobody was prevented from joining the association. If there were legitimate members of the press coming from that list I mentioned to you, the membership committee accepted their names to be part of the association for them to vote. What was said to them that they're going to be accepted, but none of them met the criteria for voting. We had even reached out to them and asked them to send any additional information to show that these people were members of the media. And that could not be provided. In fact, when several persons who didn't even know their names were on the list called to say that their names were on the list, and they only found out that their names were on the list because somebody said, transportation would be made available to you to travel from Berbice to Georgetown on this date. Your name is on this list to go and vote at these elections. They were very confused. So they called to let us know that, they were not they were not working in the entity in that capacity, and they also felt obligated to let us know because I am guessing somebody know, well, you're got to go in this room and people gonna look around and they've never seen you working and stuff like that. So people were questioning, why am I being, put to front like this?
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because the results of the elections were 70 to 25, or something
Yeah,
like that.
something like that. Yeah.
And then, but then I saw in Neil's latest letter, he said that if, I can't remember, I don't want to misquote, but something along the lines of if the proper, if it was filtered out or the list wasn't inflated or something, I don't want to misquote, but that it would have been a lot, it would
Yeah,
have been a lot closer,
I
and maybe he
you
would have
know
won.
what is so funny about this is that let us just take the two people off that Neil has a problem with. The three people, sorry, somebody he says was is a radio announcer. The person who is the alleged farmer and the taxi driver. Can he challenge the other people, the 6 to 7 people?
Yeah.
Why not challenge those people? If it was so inflated, why not challenge the other 6 to 7 people? I my own synopsis of the situation, I'm going to be very frank with you. My own synopsis of the situation is that 2 weeks before the elections, somebody woke up and said, but why we not challenging the Press Association? Who we got available to challenge the Press Association? Okay, he willing to do it? Let us do it and let us tear them apart by questioning this. And everything that Neil has said, in fact, last year, when he made all of his statements and so on, we addressed them not only at our Press Association elections, but also the letter that Svetlana Marshall responded to him. He has never responded to that letter. The meeting continued, that same general meeting continued 2 or 3 weeks after. Neil was a no-show at that meeting, where we dealt again with several of the issues that have been brought up. We're preparing for our next meeting. I'm not sure if he's not going to be a no-show again, and that's why he's letter writing. You know, who knows whether or not he's going to show up for us to deal with these issues. But my thing is, there were 6 to 7 people in that room that you have not challenged. I might challenge him as to challenge that 6 to 7 people. In addition to proving that these 3 people are not legitimate members of the media.
Yeah.
But let me say this, Alex, before you go on. Outside of being a member of the Press Association, as a journalist, I have a commitment to my colleagues. Even if I'm not wearing the GPA hat, if I go somewhere and I see my colleagues being treated a certain way, I'm going to stand up for them. I'm always going to be vocal. It doesn't matter who. And that is my own personal principle and ethic that I'm guided by. I don't see how somebody running for an elections don't have a relationship with members of the media. You come to these elections, you don't talk to anybody. Like, it boggles my mind. So when the voting happened the way that it happened, I do understand why my colleagues were more open to voting for me than for voting for anybody else. And let me say this finally on this, particular issue. The Guyana Press Association is not Nazima Raghubir. It just so happens that I've been more active in these times. Probably we've been seeing more things. We've been calling more things out. We've been doing a lot of work with our journalists. A lot of it isn't publicized. We don't speak about a lot of the things that we do behind the scenes. Like, we've been doing a lot of trauma-related work with our journalists. We've been advocating for policies that has to do with their mental health, working with a lot of journalists. And so behind the scenes, there are a lot of things that happen sometimes that people call us and say, but this has happened to me. Is there any way that you can assist? And even though it's not something that we should be doing or are mandated to do, I make it my personal duty to look into, whatever is going on. And, I am not the press association. The press association is the membership of the association. And whenever we mess up, a lot of them say to us that we mess up. It took a while for us to get our press passes in this thing. And people call and say, man, I without my press passes, why this thing got to take so long and stuff like that. And that's the type of accountability we're open to holding.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for clearing a lot of that up. And again, this wasn't to, call you out or call
I
Neil out.
appreciate this. I
I appreciate
this.
the dialogue. This is fantastic. I'm really enjoying this, and I have respect for you, and I have respect for Neil, and I hope that this can get sorted. Because at the end of the day, the Fourth Estate is one of the few bodies in the country that citizens can rely on, especially with our political landscape, and the more we are united. I say we because I feel like citizens are part of the Fourth Estate, but the more that it's united, I think the stronger, obviously, the stronger voices we have. Yeah.
But Alex, let me just quickly mention here. There is some draft amendments to the Constitution.
Yeah.
Those are, as the name suggests, draft. It doesn't affect my tenure. I am not seeking a third term like I see, is being projected and put out there. The Constitution only goes into effect after the full membership approves it. But those things, the draft Constitution it has been circulated since last year to the membership. We've gotten no feedback on it. It is actually being recirculated as a hard copy document right now to the membership. And it is going to be circulated again in a soft copy to the membership. And listen, even if I'm being forced to return to the Press Association, I am not going to do that. I am a mother. That's a full-time job. I'm a student. I'm completing a BA in history at the University of Guyana. There's so many other things happening in my life that takes up a lot of my life. I'm a journalist. Every single day, there are things that I have to do. Like I'm completing a story right now that has to be edited for an international news agency, and I am on like a deadline for another 2 stories, and I need to focus on these things so that I can earn and I can live.
Yeah. Well, no, it's a definitely a noble profession to get into. I really enjoy, like I told you, I read Stabrook every day, and I find they're one of the news sources for me that I find have balanced views. I mean, lately I've been seeing a lot of criticisms of things that are going on, and maybe justly so, but I always feel like it's good information, and the journalists there especially I'm appreciative of, and among other news organizations as well. But I wanted to also talk to you about speaking out in Guyana, and this is a conversation I have with different journalists who come on here and non-journalists. And one of my first podcasts, I had a journalist friend of mine from Germany who was here, and we're talking about freedom of the press and stuff. And she asked me, what do you think is the freedom of the press here in Guyana, or freedom of speech here? What is that like for you? And I feel like I can come on this podcast here and chat with you, and we have these frank discussions. Maybe there are some people who take it as, oh, they're opposition, or they hate government, or whatever. But I'll be lying if I didn't say that a part of me doesn't feel like, you know what, maybe I shouldn't have said that. Mm-hmm. Maybe somebody's gonna use this as an opportunity to double down on whatever I'm speaking of, the opposite of whatever I'm speaking about. And then, so it's almost like I don't have a voice anymore. Even if I am pro-government, by the way, but I've lost my voice because I've challenged something that's public narrative.
That jumped out at you, yeah.
And, you know, it's just I talk to people who if you know I do film, and sometimes when I'm doing interviews, I could be interviewing somebody or asking them, you know, their position on something, and they have nothing to lose. By the way, they could be living in behind God's back in the rain, middle of the rainforest. No, nobody's gonna find them to victimize them, but they'd be like, you
But they
know,
still have that
could you
hangover.
please not like put my face, or I would rather not talk about this, you know. So it's like sort of embedded in our psyche, and it's so messed up that we feel this way. And you've been practicing journalism for a while, so I guess on a scale of 1 to 10, one being, you know, zero free speech, you could be imprisoned by saying the wrong thing, and 10 being you can say anything you want just short of slander. Where are we on that scale, Guyana? You
So I
think?
usually don't like to use that scale. And I've said this only recently when we had the Caribbean Media Summit, and excuse me, to a lot of my colleagues overseas. And I'm saying this on the heels of H.B. Singh's letter in the Stabrook News the other day, talking about how the press is a lot freer these days compared to, you know, the PNC Forbes Burnham era, and print not being allowed in the country and people being targeted. And a conversation I had with a journalist returning to launch a book probably about 4 days ago, talking about being targeted and stuff like that. Not because journalists are not being in prison or being in jail, being, you know, harmed in any way, doesn't mean that press freedom isn't under threat in this part of the world. And I'm using this part of the world as in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
There are issues about earning, media houses' economic viability, sabotaging that viability to ensure that media houses and the press itself collapse. And when you have this wider conversation with media houses, you do understand that there's an effort to undermine the press in Guyana. There are lots of examples of that happening. The Guyana Press Association by itself had to face a couple of those last year, in which people were told not to work with us. Agencies were told that they should take our names off of, you know, programs and so on. The entities that I do work with were actually written to say, do not work with Nazima Raghubir. Those are things that
Written
are
to by who? Government?
by Mr. Marks. Mr. Marks wrote the programs that I work with, the agencies that I'm a part of, external to Guyana and so on, to say, oh, you know, this is what is happening or what not. And you know what is so interesting about that? People recommitted to working with me when those letters went to them, which was very interesting. There is the undermining of the press. I see Mr. Norton being abrasive to reporters that he don't agree with, or from media houses he don't like, or whatever. I see Mr. Jagdeo spends his time chastising the staff of Kaichor News. I see one of their persons being used to chastise reporters publicly. Last year, Davina Baggett from Stabrook News had some nasty things said to her about her on the internet after she went to a Jagdeo press conference. All of these things mess with people. There may not be a Nazima Raghubir. They may not, you know, be equipped to internalize or to dismiss some of the things that are happening. But that's the reality of press in Guyana. I've seen my colleagues at Demerara Waves been called certain names. I've seen the people at Newsroom being called certain names. I've seen Gordon Mosley being called certain names. I've seen attacks on Neil Marks. And for me, those things, they do undermine the press. They do undermine the work that we do here. And even though it may not be that extreme, I feel like the things that happen here eat away at that freedom that people like to, say, oh, but we have freedom of this and freedom of that. So that's my long answer to that. I feel the overall respect for press. And I mean, I meet many people who say to me, please don't give up. We are depending on the press, to do this and do that. And I know that there is a lot of respect for the press, but I also meet a lot of people who say, why y'all just don't throw in the towel? Things can go this way anyhow. We already know the outcome of this. We already know, what can happen and stuff like that.
Wow, that sounds like me.
But let me tell you something. I commend my colleagues who continue at it. I have a lot of respect for the people. Media work ain't easy. It ain't easy. Some days you just don't know where you're going to be and what you're going to be confronted with. It could be a very normal day. You could think that you got to cover Parliament alone today or whatever. You're doing some Baghdad, covering some flood or some, crime story or something that is very, it would mess with you. And like I've been having a lot of conversations with my mom, and there are a lot of things, like people would ask me, was your most memorable story? And, was it you remember covering or have you? And she would ask those things from time to time. Oftentimes, it's the stories that has nothing to do with politics, has nothing to do with the daily characters. Is the stories that have to do with the people and those stories that stay with you. And so journalists already have a lot to deal with, committing themselves to this and so on. And then in addition to that, when you deal with the economic viability issue is a major issue across the region. Advertising pie is very small. The government and governments know they're going to give money and ads to this media house because this media house give them a lot of fluffy coverage, and they don't, they're not going to cover the Dharmlal rape accusation unless he makes a statement. So, they don't carry the victim statement. They're going to cover the house given to the woman down the street by Minister McCoy. They're going to cover the president going walking here, there, and whatnot. But you asking people about cost of living, that paints us in a different light. They're not going to get, any advertising or any major advertising and stuff like that. And, that eats into the media house and whether or not, it can really perform the functions and provide the coverage that is necessary to inform the very public.
Sure. Now that you mention it, I do want to talk a little bit on the role of media with regards to human rights. Now, in Guyana, there's obviously a lot. We have a big human rights. Well, I would say it's a fairly big human rights issue. A lot of times we're reading about, different young children being subjected to varying forms of abuse. All over the place, taken advantage of, that kind of thing. We've seen the sort of the nature of how law enforcement deals with it, which is not very effective, and we'll talk about that a bit later. But recently, there's sort of been a resurfacing of allegations with regards to the Dharmlal allegations, and I bring this up because I know the Press Association has come out with a statement requesting more information from the police. Which, great. Now there's a few things I want to address here. One is that, what are our shortfalls with regards to these sort of issues being covered in the press? Because traditionally, it's in the police hands, let the police do their work. And then we never really hear from it again until the story dies off. It probably doesn't even make economic sense for media houses to pursue it. So how does that process work? And I also kind of want to touch on one thing. I know that the alleged victim had a press conference and got CNN involved. And it was, with a number of journalists, I think, on a Zoom call. I don't know if you were on that call. But then a journalist also came out, which I found very interesting. In the sort of report, the journalists questioned the victims. Have you ever been diagnosed for mental health issues, and have you, been, prescribed and anything, which I thought very interesting to play into a story on sexual assault. I'm not saying, I don't know if it's right or wrong to ask, but I'm curious as to what you think the nature of those questions are in a narrative like this, because is that important to know? Is it not? How does that affect the bigger issue?
So personally, I wouldn't ask that question, and I can't speak to why that person asked that question. It just seems very odd for me that a question has been asked like that. I have worked with sexual assault victims, sexual abuse victims. I've covered many stories involving sexual assault. I know there are a lot of intricacies involved in, even speaking about sexual assault. And I've seen interesting things in comments, like, why is she making the statement now? And, stuff like that. Why is she reporting it to the police? And it means that we have a lot of work to do on, when I say we, I mean the public. We have a lot of work to do on just educating people on, sexual assault and, victims reporting and when they want to speak and that type of thing. So I don't want to talk for the media houses. I know everybody, it's really dependent on their resources, the type of story, and how much time they got and resources to go after a story. The first thing with the Guyana Press Association making the statement that it made, our members, a lot of them editors, had come to us and said, since Friday, we'd asked the police for information on this very public matter, and they have not. On Sunday night, again, we gave the police another opportunity to speak on this matter, and it was clear that the police did not intend to provide the public with any information on this matter. And
But what was their response?
there was no response.
They just said nothing?
And that's what forced the statement on Monday morning, because here it is, a major issue, somebody has been implicated. There is so much misinformation going out, going out around there, and the body that is supposed to at least be saying something. We heard from Mr. Dharamlal, we heard from the victim, but we had no way of corroborating this information if the police didn't say, well, okay, we have an investigation going on. This woman made this report on Thursday, and on Friday, the police still hadn't said anything. I really don't understand what's going on with the police. It has been a challenge to get information from the police. And it's interesting that you talk about follow-up stories, because my colleague Gordon Mosley has been asking questions about several incidents. The arrest of a young man that hasn't been charged, the alleged friendly fire from a police officer that killed a fellow police officer. And he actually asked these questions again yesterday in the WhatsApp medium that we have with the police. It's been 2 months. It has been 2 months since we've been asking, questions on these cases, at least that one, and still have not been able to get the answer. So I know this is a lot of what we're dealing with. People have said to us, oh, but there are other ways to get the information. When an agency doesn't want to talk to you and they have dictated to their employees and whoever else not to talk to you, you reach a block. There is so much that you can do. In many occasions, like victims have spoken to us, yes, you try to minimize the impact on that person by repeating interviews and calling for, comments on a regular basis and stuff like that. Like, I have been talking to victims of sexual assault for years. And last year, I had reason to be talking to a victim. We never spoke about the incident that happened because I had seen her statement already. And when I was following up for updates, the police haven't charged the man as yet. And this is since last year. And I asked her for an update, like, have you been contacted by the police and so on? She said, yes, she was re interviewed. And then I said to her, I said, listen, I'm so sorry that I have to do this, but could you just relate to me what the police asked you and what you told them? So just that I can be in the know to follow up. And even though this was not for public consumption or anything, right? I was not reporting on this. It just really messed me up that I have to ask her to repeat these things that she have compartmentalized and probably, wants to forget. So, it's a lot of that, we're dealing with. Reporters over time, like we have done a lot of training on reporting on women and children, reporting on suicides. We actually have a guideline for reporting on suicides. We don't force people to be guided by these guidelines. We want every media house to adopt their own, ethics and principles and their own self-regulation, tactics and methods and stuff like that. And this is why we do these things in consultation with the media. There are another round of training that's going to happen later this year. Some of it has to do with the human rights aspects, like how to deal with victims and how to deal covering members of the LGBTQ community, reporting on crime, for instance, and stuff like that. And those are things that we can do. I know follow-ups continue to be an issue. Starboard News, to their credit, is one of the agencies I know if they are bent on following up on an issue, you are going to see a report on it, even if it is to say there have been
Even if it's nothing, yeah.
no new developments,
Yeah.
right? And I commend them for that. But let me tell you something, Alex. The media, I commend my colleagues again. We got to cover every single thing, right? And I made this comment to Miranda LaRose when she interviewed me a couple years ago for Starboard News. I said, sometimes I feel that we're taking up like the fight for every other, civic body, civil society, whatever. You're covering the environment, you're covering crime, you're covering politics, you're covering corruption, human rights, and then while you're doing all of this, the workforce within the media continues to dwindle and the issues continue to get larger. Some issues naturally take a back burner. For me, I would like to see more human interest pieces. I would like to see more focus on the people.
Yeah.
I hate sometimes that everything is dictated by politics in this country. And I think that is why I enjoy traveling so much and meeting Guyanese all over. I recently filed a story on how the dry weather was affecting Imbutiru, which sits on the border with Venezuela.
Spend a lot of time there.
It's a beautiful place. And, those are real issues. To see them people, got to take the barrels and buckets and whatever
Oh,
for
find
go down
fresh
for
water,
go
yeah.
find fresh water for hours down a place.
Some people don't
that's
get to bathe for days, like it's just
Yeah.
these are the issues that like sort of need highlighting. It's weird. Actually, Vicky and I just came out. Speaking of the drought, and just to switch to a lighter topic for a little bit, Vicky and I just went to Apateri Village in the Rupununi. Well, actually, technically, I don't know if it's in the Rupununi, but
Region 9.
yeah, Region 9. And they, I don't know if you know, but Apateri, a big part of their economic sustainability is sports fishing for the arapaima. And arapaima is protected,
Yeah.
and arapaimas migrate to and from ponds. So like when it's the wet season, they'll move from the river to the pond because you can like basically swim through the jungle. The water's so high, and then they'll spawn in the ponds and whatnot. And because of the extended drought, in many of these ponds where they take tourists to go fish, the ponds have gotten so low and the arapaimas are trapped. And you have these giants, these like 6 to 8 foot giants just, swimming around in these shallow ponds. Their backs are getting burned, and worse, they're totally easy pickings for jaguars. So jaguars will come and pick off these 400 plus pound fish, drag them up and just devour them. And one pond we went to, and you had 14 plus arapaima dead all around. And then some left in the pond just waiting to be, so part of their mission was going into these ponds, the villagers of Apatary, who do this catch and release tourism. They would go and round up these fish, put them in a sling, and then drug them through the forest and then release them. And it's just fantastic. And so we went to cover the story. And I'll send you the draft later today. We made a film of it. And it's just amazing. You go and spend time in these places and you see how people live and their realities. And it really puts into perspective, just a lot of the nonsense we focus on here in our modern society. It just feels so trivial, so pointless. But then you look at someone who's living in this environment, who relies on nature. These guys can build a camp like nothing. Like cut down a couple branches, sling it up, start a fire, build a kitchen here, do this here. Amazing at navigating the shallow rivers. Like, it's just like, we have such amazing people in this country, and I think these are the things that don't get highlighted. We just, all the focus is on maybe the things that, a lot of things that don't matter in the long run.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because a couple of years ago, after somebody had highlighted the movement of the Arapaimas and these young people dedicated, there were a group of young boys. I had said, these are the people that we should be giving national awards to. Like, these are the people who deserve the recognition, right? I don't want it. These are the people who, and you're right, like, there are a lot of untold stories. The media don't get a chance to tell a lot of these because, they'll tell you they don't have the resources, it's expensive, that type of thing. So I must commend you for, highlighting this and bringing this, like everybody should see something like this. But these are the people doing the hard work. These are the people making the difference. And, these are the people that should be commended.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think about President Irfan Ali? I ask this because, he's sort of been one of the, to me, he's one of the few presidents that I think has kind of struck a chord with the younger generation. Mm-hmm. Usually we see a lot of old heads who have, followed on tradition. I had a lot of high expectations for David Granger. It was a nice change based on the 23 years he went through. But, I think he to me, at the end, he felt like totally out of touch with young people. To me, maybe some people totally. President Ali seems like a PR machine, with how he puts his image out there. He's involved and is, he seems to be more relatable. There's really an extra effort to engage people, to shake hands, to move around. And I'm curious, like, what do you make of all this, being in the press and sort of seeing politics and then seeing this sort of, but I'm not saying his actions are disingenuous at all. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying, how do you sort of make of this? Because this is the first time we've seen such a consolidated effort to connect with the public. Whether it solves the issues everybody's having or not. But what is your take on it?
So I usually don't like to talk on sitting ministers, members of parliament, and the president and so on, because I cover and I have to interact with these people from time to time. And I really would like to keep my views, unbiased and, very open. I'll say this. I usually set my standards very low for politicians. I and I say this because I'm a journalist. I want to set my standards low and have them prove us Guyanese wrong. And I say this also because I don't want to be personally connected in any way to anybody that I'm covering and I provide coverage for. I don't want to be swayed in any way. I don't want to have a personal opinion or a likeness or dislikeness for that person. I want to see their actions unfiltered.
Yeah.
And, if you ask me that question in probably about 20 years, I will certainly have a different opinion.
Yeah.
For me, like I'm still assessing in a lot of ways the presidents that Guyana have been exposed to, the types of politicians. I've read about Arthur Chung and Forbes and Chedi Jagan and Janet's stint and so on. I have experienced both as a citizen, like I was in school and then out of school into journalism, Barra Jack Dio's presidency. We don't like to talk about Sam Hines, but he was president for quite a short period. And also David Granger, Donald Ramatar, and so on. I am still, in my mind as a journalist, assessing everything that they would have done. And, it's interesting that you asked that question because now, as a student of history, we're taught to really analyze so many different things. I have to really wear a different cap to try to understand all of these persons involved. So there's a lot to say about President Irfan Ali's relatability to Guyanese and so on. Yes, he's much more visible. But, there are questions I would ask. Is the visibility equated to management of the issues and, fulfilling the promises or fulfilling the manifesto and so of the political party? And even as I said this, these are the same targets and questions I'd have if there was any other party that, is there in power. Looking at, the different opposition parties and what, they're doing and, if they're being held accountable and stuff like that. So in my mind, I always think about, I have to hold this person accountable. There are questions that I have to ask on behalf of the people and stuff like that. And I do keep my personal views and commitments and so on at a different level. In fact, I don't like to talk about this, but there was a friend of the media who had entered into politics pre 2015, and our relationship had dwindled because I had stopped communication. Because in my head, I felt that there was no reason for me to be in any personal communication with this person unless it's official business. And then that person passed away, and I really felt like shit
Yeah.
because, I was like, maybe I should have reached out and said something. So I really do try, and this could be only me, to keep, my personal views about politicians, away and to assess them based on the things that I've seen and to assess them on, their actions and so on. But I honestly don't feel that I can make an accurate, like, or give an accurate take on anyone in particular until, a couple of years down the line. What I'd like to see, Alex, is more people, and I know people say, oh, young people should get involved in politics, and I'd like to see more people getting involved in holding people accountable, in making their views known, in holding these parties accountable and so on. Every time you speak about an issue, and somebody see, oh, does how you feel, you must be, anti PNC or anti PPP, or you have an issue with the AFC or so on. I feel like the memberships of these parties, should be more open to holding their members and their parties accountable. It will make so much of a difference. Outside of that, there is room for us to be more vocal on issues that are bothering us, highlight the positives, highlight the negatives, make suggestions on how things can work, and, you know, be part of the mechanisms that are available to move this place forward.
Yeah. No, 100%. And I respect your I respect that. I mean, look, it's you take your job very seriously, and I think taking that approach of distancing yourself from those kinds of opinions or definitive public answers, it makes sense. I think that's what makes a good journalist, and I totally
It
respect
also
that.
makes me a very boring person because
Well,
I don't go. I mean, I used to go out in my younger years, but even when I went out in my younger years, I was very cognizant that I'm a young woman,
yeah.
and people might be like, oh, I could send a drink over for her and get her to talk to
Yeah,
me,
yeah, yeah,
and then
yeah,
they're
yeah,
gonna
yeah.
start talking about politics and stuff.
Yeah.
So my circle of friends remains small. I don't go to, people want to invite me here, there, and everywhere, and that type of thing. I'm very specific about my types of interaction and stuff like that, because I take the work that I do to heart, and maybe that's a terrible thing. I'm a lonely person, but I do take it to heart, and I think I had to build my own internal, mechanisms to deal with, certain things. I do feel like a little disappointed from time to time in how things go. In 2020, I had said to my partner, and this was the first time I'm speaking about it publicly, but it's also the first time I felt this way. I said to him I didn't want to be in Guyana anymore.
Yeah.
And I think it was because I was a new mom. My son was just about 3 or 4 months old. And it was elections, the 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 rigging, the whole back and forth and whatever. It just feels like a cycle of abuse of Guyanese. And I was like, I mean, my son was in the car next to me, and I'm like, this is what we got to deal with every couple of years. Like this cycle of abuse
Yeah.
by groups of people who feel that Guyana is there to own and govern and hold on to, and
Yeah.
and stuff like that. And so I felt very disappointed in the people above us who are involved in politics and making decisions that affect my life. And I felt like I didn't want to be here, but more so for my toddler, and seeing how things would like affect him in the future. And I was also at the end of just being abused publicly. My ethnicity was being called out. The fact that my partner is black was used against me. My job was being used against me. In fact, there's a colleague who worked at Guyana Chronicle who was harassed on the road. Her food box was taken away by the protesters, by GCOM, and they searched it up. I don't know what they were looking for. And then they said to her, you know, we would send people to rob and rape your family. And then there was one day I asked the police to remove a man who had embedded himself with the media. And then he said in front of the police, when I see you on the road, I'll rape you. And so it was dealing with that, and then also dealing with the online bullying, because these parties, that playbook I mentioned earlier, there were people bullying you
Yeah.
online, and then there were people bullying you in person, and having to deal with that and do my job, and then also think about, this is what my son would be exposed to.
Yeah.
This is just a cycle. It really made me felt like I want to, be out of here. And my partner is so committed to Guyana. He is, he spent a brief time overseas. He said Guyana is where he wanted to be. His business is here. He is a Guyanese to the bone, like love this place and everything. And even though I was saying that to him, I know, like, what his thoughts were and how committed he is to Guyana. And even as I say that, I was in Pakistan in February. I think we had spoken sometime.
Yeah.
And when I went to Pakistan, I can't speak about the elections or so on, but I can speak about the country. I went to Pakistan and I saw all these things like happening and the realities that, people live there. And I was like, and Guyana.
Maybe it's not so bad in Guyana. Yeah, yeah.
Right? And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
So, let me go home. But when, you come back home and then you're like, oh God, these people
You
are
know
going to
what?
piss you off again.
Maybe I could take 1-2 threats of rape or rob. Like, it's not so bad. The likelihood is maybe a little different. It's funny you say that because I've spoken to a few people here on this podcast and otherwise, and especially women who have young kids, and have said, Alex, I sometimes I just want to get out of here. And they love Guyana, by the way, just like you, and are super committed to being a part of society, and are very, have spent a lot of their life trying to do that, and have just become so jaded and pessimistic and beat down by just the system and the culture, where they're like, I just want to run away. I just want to have a new life, start over. And I get it. And it's funny that, we always reference, oh, well, things are so much better now, like back in the day with, Burnham and the brain drain and all this thing that used to happen. It's like, that to some extent is still happening now in a different way.
Brain is happening. It's never stopped
it's
happening.
It's just evolved, because we haven't really changed as a people. There's so many and you talk about all this election stuff and these threats. Like, what kills me too is that we really reflect our primitive nature when there's a lot of reference to sexual violence, just in the speech and the threats,
Yeah.
It's almost like, is that what you think is going to give you this power?
Mm-hmm.
And at a core level, it says something. I'm not sure what exactly it's saying about, obviously, patriarchal, right? But it's like we really don't have even the pages online that are supposedly run by people in high positions or whatever. The releases always reference something of sexual nature, not necessarily
Against
I'm going to rape
women,
you.
and they like to throw about homophobic.
Yes.
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
that's another.
But it's like I look at that and I'm like, it's just for that to rile a group of people up. It's just like, what does that even mean? In the grandest scheme of things, that really, it says so much more about where this is coming from, and the fact that people aren't really taking that and are getting riled up is like, wow, we got a long way to go.
Yeah,
Not everybody, by the way.
True.
But yeah.
And this is why, there needs to be more people coming out and speaking out on a variety of issues and topics. Generally, the culture has been just to be unkind to women. And I know this is why my colleagues and other women in doing other things sometimes feel that they don't want to go to front, because it always comes back to something about, sexuality and, oh, she can't do this because she's a woman or whatever. And yes, there have been people who have broken barriers and so on. But I've seen how, different things have been weaponized against women. In the past couple of weeks, I work on the Guyana Together campaign. And the Guyana Together campaign is really about telling stories of love and support from members of the LGBT community through their family and friends. And we've had wonderful stories told.
Yeah.
And these stories, for me, exist out there, right? A gay neighbor, a lesbian friend, a lesbian daughter, that type of thing. But to now put a spotlight on that brings a whole, you put it, not only a spotlight, but it's more conversations being had about it. And, working on the Guyana Together campaign is one thing, but then I look at so much of the narrative. Like, I saw some videos of a social media commentator attacking a member of parliament. And as part of this attack is suggesting that, oh, he's a gay man and he's talking about things being so big and wide. And, this is repeated by a senior politician and, and then there were these comments about the president giving the members of the Guyana Defense Force, feeding them cake. And there were homophobic comments attached to that. And that is, meant to really carry some power, as you said. And it says a lot, yes. It's about, it opens a whole lot of questions about, where we're going and what are we doing and, what is our contribution to these,
Yeah.
national conversations, but also support for these groups of people. And these conversations have been going. Don't think that they haven't been going on, but I don't know whether or not they're going on in the right groups, because oftentimes it's people with the type of sway, the type of power, and the knowledge are making these same
Yeah.
comments and making these same influences. For me personally, I would like to see more women in politics. I would like to see more women in senior positions across, our governance system. I would like to see a lot more diversity. I think there are a lot of Guyanese with lots to offer. But to be able to do that, we have to break a lot of barriers. And I'm not sure where we are as a people if we're prepared to break those barriers.
For sure. For sure. I think it's we definitely need like a solid, like a big paradigm shift. It has to be like a major event has to like happen and catch steam.
That scares me.
Yeah, me too, because I feel like for that to happen, something bad has to happen. And that's unfortunately how these things usually work. But there's no way that someone or a group of people could break the mold right now with our current political landscape. I just don't see it happening.
If you've looked at revolutions around the world, they're always hinged on this common issue. And maybe it's not the flag flown or whatever, but they're usually bread and butter issues.
Yeah.
And we genuinely, yes, there's poverty in Guyana, but I like to say that, people still can borrow something and borrow a pint of rice there and go in the backyard and pick something. And so even though there are poverty issues, the types of hunger and starvation that really forces people into this,
Yeah.
don't happen. And not only in Guyana, in parts of the region, with Haiti being an exception. So in that way, we have not been pushed to that brink to really,
Yeah.
hold people accountable and call them out. And then I'm not trying to trivialize any other issue when I say that. I just think that we have not really hit that rock bottom
Yeah.
thing. Because people like to say, look, oh, we getting oil and the money trickling down, but the living, so.
It almost feels like we're at this point of like just barely there. So like if this is the breaking point here, we're like here. And then sometimes we'll get to here, maybe here. But then we go back down. And this is kind of our floating zone here. So yeah. I mean, because we complain a lot about things, but just like, to your point, like
My colleague, I'm sorry to cut you, Enrico Wolford likes to say we go to the precipice and we look over.
yeah. Actually, it's
Just
true.
like, oh,
Yeah.
okay. And then we move back.
Would be nice, but I'm gonna hold out.
I'm gonna- yeah.
With, something here. Yeah, no, I hear you. Last couple of things I wanted to talk to you about was we've seen an evolution. Back to journalism. Because media houses are so divided along political lines for the most part. We've seen a lot of social media commentators, influencers pop up that have a big sway among different groups of people, some intersecting groups of people. Some of them are pro-government. A lot of them are pro-government, actually. Many are not. However, they don't operate under the constitution of journalism in Guyana. They don't necessarily have the standard of operation that you guys may have or try to abide by. How do you see their role in the media landscape? Because they have this uncanny ability to rile up people. Their information, how it's presented, it's not necessarily objective. It's very definitive and many times infuriating. They're very loose with words, very direct. How do they play into this whole thing? Because to me, both sides of that sort of faction of information, to me, is like a shitstorm in the already complicated realm of the press and then, government. What do you see? What do you see their role as?
All of this is completely necessary. When you look at communication, you look at freedom of expression, and you examine, what the press is supposed to be doing. I'm not going to say that there isn't a role for these people. There is a role for these communicators, these, influencers, social media commentators, and so on. And it takes me back to, the US had that radio host who interviewed Pamela Anderson. I can't remember his name, but he is well known for his interviews on, sex and, stuff like that.
Howard Stern?
Howard Stern, thank you, God. Howard Stern in the US. We had our own CN Sharma here who would go out and tape his interactions in the public.
First to do it.
God, first to do it. And bring them back and, unfiltered, provide, that content to viewers. In fact, one of the first murder scenes I saw as a child was through Channel 6. It was a murder at one of the markets in which a man had murdered his wife and they had blood all over this squash, and so they were selling and, stuff like that. That was live and unfiltered and, stuff like that. So, when there are things happening now with social media commentators, people and their views and stuff like that, I feel all of it is necessary if you were to examine, freedom of expression and, access to the types of information and so is out there. What we have to do, because there is obviously a whole disinformation challenge that is out there. When I say we, the public, you have to arm yourself with the necessary tools to filter and fact check the information that is coming to you. I can't tell somebody that they must only look at Capital News or NCN 6 o'clock news alone. People may have that own internal bias and say, this is what I'm going to do. And likewise, I can't tell somebody how they should relate to the public and, disseminate their information. What we have to do as two different groups operating is that journalism, we're more accountable to, what we do. And then I've seen, I'll talk about the accountability for the other side in a bit, but there is a broadcast authority that really monitors and flags, different discrepancies, whether it's radio or TV. They, for newspapers, libel law is still very much used, defamation law is still very much used. And online, people have been suing people left, right, and center. I mean, is every other tomorrow you see defamation,
Yeah.
cases are out and so on. It also says a lot about the people who are behind these things and whether or not they are serious about their credibility, or they're serious about just putting misinformation and disinformation out there. So I've seen people use the public spaces, the TikTok and Facebook lives and so on. I've seen them use it very responsibly. And I've seen like good things come out of, when I say good things, like information and interaction and stuff like that. And I've seen some really horrible stuff coming out, defaming people, just being very, I don't even know, but, unkind to women, homophobic comments, just a general nastiness.
Yeah.
And I've seen that. What I've also seen is that people in society look at all these things for entertainment purposes.
Sure.
And then they revert to the news to see whether or not some of these is real, or, how to deal with that situation and so on. I am not one to tell people what to look at and what not to look at. I read all the newspapers. I read all the websites. I've been doing this, since, I grew up reading the newspaper, but as a journalist, I was taught that, you read everything, you watch everything, you be informed as much as possible. So I see the views out there. I read as much as possible. I know not everybody has that time and energy, but also not everybody has that interest in doing that. But I usually try to say to people, when you are observing certain things on, you see this on social media, you have a chance to listen to somebody on social media, and they're making statements and comments that you are unsure of, there is an opportunity to check and double check that information with people that you trust or sources that you trust. And, that is something that you should work on. But, I'm not like, I feel like there are a lot of unhinged CN Sharmas walking around. CN Sharma in his day was, he wasn't as toxic as I've seen some of
Yeah.
the comments being made. He really did work on like these very
He also did work on genuine stories.
genuine
too.
stories, yeah.
It wasn't just gossip and,
No,
and
that's the
hearsay
thing, yeah.
and somebody submitted this anonymous, it definitely was more wholesome. And I think that's why people were gravitated towards him. He didn't just talk about politics or criticize the government, but he genuinely was on the ground with the people. Like it's different if I'm here and, somebody sent me these text messages to publish about something going on. Well, he was there talking to them, and there was a face to it, and it was a different time. And I think, again, the whole system of doing this has evolved with the time and the resources we have. And yeah, I hear what you're saying. Look, like, I think a big part of it is the entertainment factor. and a lot of these people are, and again, not criticizing anyone. They have an important role to play, but they're also primarily entertainers because the platform drives
Monetizes.
by engagement, and it just that's what you do, unfortunately, and every it just has it's the world we live in. So it's interesting to see the dynamic, but no, I think it's a good thing too. I agree with you. I think it could get toxic, but the internet on a whole is a very toxic place.
And even as I've seen over time, because I think I've monitored about 20 defamation matters last year, and I keep seeing defamation matters, coming up again and again, which means people who feel that they have been dishonored and affected or liable, they have taken matters in their own hand to challenge it through a medium that they trust, and as the court.
Yeah.
So I've seen a lot of that happening, but I don't want to. I'm not gonna mess with anybody's freedom to express themselves and their thoughts
Sure.
on anything that is happening.
Yeah. Last thing for you, moving forward from here, how do we, as a society, strengthen the fourth estate? I mean, this is such an important time. We have an election coming up next year, especially. That my thoughts on it, are that we have a very dominant party, given the last election and the inability of the opposition to sort of clean house, come with new leadership. They're fighting on off of more than the back foot, despite the bad publicity that the current government might be having now. I think they're just in the position without a viable third party. We have a storm coming ahead of us. So the media is going to play a very important role in just putting out the facts, so the John public can decide, what's best for Guyana. How do we sort of, as a society, strengthen this, especially with like internal conflict that might be going on that we spoke about earlier? How do we continue to just strengthen the fourth estate and allow that to be, a stronger voice for Guyanese?
The press is not the Press Association. Yes, the Press Association has a lot of work to do, and at the helm of the association, I'm committed to getting that work done. It's interesting that you asked that question, because I've seen somebody questioning the Press Association holding the government accountable and all of that. And I am yet to see this person who's been paid to provide a cultural policy, produce that cultural policy. But that does not, rob him of his voice to say things publicly. So, even with that said, I've seen this. Guyanese citizens are holding the press accountable. I would encourage Neil Marks to write all the letters he can. I would encourage people looking on, if they don't agree with certain things reported, they voice it, because I honestly feel media houses, if there's an aggrieved person, if you don't like a way a story has been covered and so on, you should be free to say that. And I've seen people do that. People have been writing about on Q, coming around every World Press Freedom Day. People have a lot to say about the press. And I find that it's healthy, because there are things that I can pick up on there and said, okay, well, maybe this is something that we can do more training on. Maybe this is something that we can be talking to our membership about, and stuff like that. I think it's healthy for us. And, so I want to say to the public, by all means, you have to hold the press accountable, just as we are, holding politicians accountable. At the same time, I want to let people know that, you have to hold your politicians accountable also. You don't have to wait on the press to do certain stories. If, there's an issue, if, you feel this way about it, speak about it. And it's a lot more easier for you to speak about it now than before. Like, there are more mediums available to you. I've seen people doing this. I am a little fearful of 2025 elections because we have not matured as a nation to deal with issues like the ethnicities and bringing people's personal lives and stuff into it. And I am a little bit more fearful because with 2020 we didn't have a media code. We usually have media codes for every election since 2001, but we've never had politicians don't have codes that they sign to. And I think, we need to set high standards for these people that are going to be campaigning because that is where I see the danger. That is where I see people are being riled up and weaponized against fellow Guyanese. And I find that very scary. And there are things that are not usually reported by the press, things that are said on campaign platforms, but because it's being broadcast to, 20,000 viewers or whatever, it's already said publicly.
Yeah.
And so it can, be threatening to this country. And with that said, heading into, for me, it's already an elections year. Campaigning has started. And, heading into 2025, we really have to ensure that we keep an eye on multiple things that are happening. The Guyana Elections Commission is one. The actual elections process is another one, so that we don't have a repeat of 2020. Then holding the very politicians accountable during this process because, they like to come with their promised documents, their manifesto, and, we're going to do this and that and that and that. Check their previous manifestos and see if they've achieved all the things that, they promised to do over those years. Or, if these are some copy and paste jobs and stuff like that. So there's still a lot that the press has to do, but I'd encourage Guyanese to also step up and, do their part and hold everybody accountable. It's not a one set of people thing. It's everybody's business.
Well, Nazima, I can't tell you how much it was a pleasure talking to you. I really enjoyed this conversation. I'm glad you came by, and I I hope we could continue to have more of this sort of dialogue, and not just here, just amongst everywhere. I'm so like relieved to be able to speak openly and discuss the issues. And again, once again, thank you so much for coming, and all the best in the future. I hope that you have a successful your last term. Will if this is
I'm
your last term.
eagerly awaiting the end of this all. I'd
Yeah.
like to dedicate a lot more time to my toddler. It's so interesting how children change your life. So I'd like to dedicate a lot more time to that. And something I've been very passionate about is that I still want to be. I've been doing research for like several agencies and stuff like that. I really want to spend some time doing some, active research on specific issues and topics, some related to the press, some related to women. Food is a big focus of my life. Like I'd really like to put together something that focuses on Guyanese food and the origins and stuff like that. And I've been actively thinking about that. So I would really like some time to myself. But outside of that, my heart will always be with my colleagues in the press. I'm not saying I'm leaving the press. I'm just saying that, I'm not going to sit by and see anybody being disrespected. I'm not going to see anybody, being affected by any particular issue and not be vocal about it. I will always be there to support them.